Hello, welcome to Farmgate. I'm ffinlo Costain. This programme is the first in a series in which I'll be talking to farmers actually delivering agroecological agriculture on their farms. The experiences of the farmers we'll be talking to will vary. Some will run large second or third generation enterprises, while others will be new entrants and tenants. The farmers in this series are working with the Soil Association as Agroecology Ambassadors. Now that's a grand title, but what it means is that these farmers are working with the Soil Association as part of their 10 Years for Agroecology project. They're inviting people, virtually of course, onto their farms to help develop a better understanding of agroecology and to move us into a conversation about how this sort of farming actually works in practice. Today we're focusing on cattle, and in particular beef cattle, and I'm joined by two fantastic people putting agroecological principles into action. Nikki Yoxall farms at Howe Mill in Huntly, Aberdeenshire, where she and her husband set up Grampian graziers. Nikki has a small herd of native breed cattle grazing in an agroforestry system, and you can find her on Twitter under the handle @HoweMill. Denise Walton is an organic producer from Peelham Farm in Fulden, Berwickshire, and Denise and her family farm cattle, pigs and store sheep. They have an on-farm butchery and they retail directly to the public. Denise can be found on Twitter as @Peelham Farm. Welcome both.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Finlo.
To start us off, I'd like to understand just a bit more about what agroecology actually is. So, Nikki, could you start us off with that? What is agroecology? How does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So agroecology is basically bringing together agriculture and ecology, and the basis of that is thinking about the farm as an ecosystem. So rather than thinking about nature and farming as two separate things, what we tend to do is think about how the processes, the groups of individual organisms and communities actually contribute to the functioning of our farm ecosystem, or our agroecosystem, as you might want to call it. And so agroecology is about kind of harnessing that, mimicking nature, which is known as biomimicry, and doing that in a way that promotes abundance, not only for nature, but could also be considered as productivity from an agricultural point of view.
Now, there's lots of talk at the moment about regenerative agriculture. And, you know, when you describe agroecology there's clearly some crossover. Is there a difference between what people think of as agroecological farming and regenerative farming?
From my point of view, I think that there is crossover. I suppose agroecological farming, as I said, very much bases the farming practice in as part of an ecosystem. Regenerative farming tends to have a number of principles, so things like maintaining year-round ground cover, maximising on disturbance, enacting and addressing limiting factors, trying to maximise on photosynthesis through that ground cover, and various other principles, most of which do tie in to agroecology and the way that you would harness that kind of ecosystem working. But I think that there are still maybe issues around wording and definitions, and I think we're all still trying to work that through, really. But, you know, ultimately it's about how you can harness sunlight to produce energy and do that in a way that supports water, nutrient, airflow cycling, all of those things.
Okay, and Denise, I know you were, before you were a farmer, you were an ecologist, and I wonder if you have any particular thoughts to sort of add there.
Well, I suppose, the fact that we've got these two words, agroecology and regenerative agriculture, in circulation demonstrates the shift in mindset that we all absolutely need to make the difference to the wildlife and carbon sequestering values of our farms. Obviously, when I was a practicing ecologist, I spent a lot of time walking thousands of acres of the northeast of England and southern Scotland, and I saw then the impact of intensive farming on habitats. That was my job. So, I can see where agroecology and regenerative agriculture are shifting that in a way that doesn't challenge the accepted norm of profitable agriculture. Obviously we're organic, which is certified, and that is, as we've discussed before, that's a rules-based system, because we are making that as a contract with our customer that we are actually what we say we are. We are farming agroecology and going a step further, and we are being audited. So organic, agroecology, regenerative, they're all very good terms, but one is much more rules-based than the others. But the shift in mindset that they express is very, very welcome.
And whether it's organic, agroecological or regenerative, it's kind of a mile apart from what we would associate with traditional commodity agriculture. That's really interesting. I think that's a really good way of getting us into this. Nikki, I want to come to you just in terms of, getting into the farm systems a bit. Now, in other places, when we've spoken before, you've talked about being a new entrant, a first-generation farmer, and feeling that you had no choice but to farm using agroecology. There are other new entrants around who've made completely different choices. So why do you say that you feel you had no choice but to be agroecological?
We came onto the land, if you like, from I suppose more of an ecological standpoint or viewpoint. We enjoy being in the outdoors. Our background had very much been based in rural areas and in the countryside. And so we could see and appreciate the value of healthy ecosystems. So I think, and also when we first moved to Scotland and we took on this land, our priority really was around how do we ensure that land and that ecosystem that we were then responsible for, that part of that ecosystem, was flourishing and was healthy. And then having kind of done some research and heard from some really inspirational people and, meeting up with farmers locally who were moving in that way, it became very clear that for us, cattle were absolutely going to be the way into farming that also gave us that opportunity to support the land to be as healthy as it possibly could be. So there's that aspect of it, which is about kind of the mindset and the approach and not necessarily just wanting to farm, but wanting to undertake land management that was had positive outcomes.
Was it an economic decision as well, though?
Absolutely. So, I was going to say that the other option is about, coming into farming with very little capital. And so we didn't have any barns or buildings. And so we had to think about, right, well, how can our animals get shelter when the weather's bad or it's really hot? And so immediately that pulled us into looking at agroforestry and then thinking about how the cows fit into the life of those trees and that system. So, definitely was combining the focus from which we were coming, which was ecological, but also thinking about how can we farm in a way that takes as little input as possible, make sure that we were using the natural world around us to fulfill various roles like shelter and nutritional benefit from trees, etc.
Fantastic. You talked about there starting up a farm with almost no capital. I mean, this is, it's a huge risk for anybody that wants to get into agriculture. It's a huge barrier, really. It's very difficult when you're a new entrant. An awful lot of farmers, they already have, some family connection to the land that they take on. So that must have been incredibly daunting. And I wonder if you've started yet to get to the point. I mean, how long have you been going, and have you started to get to the point where you feel a bit more in control of the business?
Definitely. We've been going now for 2 years, so we're very, very new to this still, and we're looking to, we will be moving to a new farm this year. We've had a great opportunity come up, and that has allowed us to really think about expanding what we're doing and stacking different enterprises on top of the beef as well. So we've definitely spent 2 years learning and then being able to have the confidence to put ourselves forward for another opportunity. So I would definitely say that we feel far more stable than when we first came into it, and we were just, every minute was a learning curve, I think. So
fantastic. Well, talking of new entrants, Denise, you were a new entrant, but 30 years ago you started out just like Nikki, really, with 20 acres, and now you've got 650, as well as a butchery and an online retail business. That must be quite a journey over 3 decades. And I wonder if this is where you expected to be when you started out in farming in 1990.
Well, I suppose there was always the hope that we would be here, but there was never really the real expectation because, and I'm sure Nikki would recognise too, that, with hope comes a lot of naivety. And we were very naive when we started. And when we bought the small holding, which was £40,000 that way back then in 1989, it had a shed. And we saw up here, because the farm is between 200 and 700, is slightly marginal, that our way into farming was cattle. So we bought cull dairy cows and multiple suckled continental cross dairy is how we started. But we always had this desire and vision to sell direct. We were lucky in that Chris was working on a farm locally at the time. So we were already considered part of the local farming community. But I think had we come in afresh to the smallholding and to the area in Berwickshire where we live, it would have been very, very difficult for us to have got under the skin of the farming community and farming system at the time.
Interesting you talk about sort of being part of the farming community and your husband, Chris, sort of working on other farms, because you decided clearly that the mainstream, the way that other farmers were doing things, that the mainstream commodity approach wasn't for you. And I wonder why that was.
Well, I suppose really, because I spent a lot of time tramping over quite a lot of North Northumberland and northeast of England and southern Scotland and saw, as I've mentioned earlier, the effects of commodity farming. My background is as I'm a postgraduate ecologist and an absolute passion for plants. A lot of my work was in rare species and habitat management. Just literally filled my heart with sorrow to see the impact of conventional farming on wildlife at the time. So we came into farming. I mean, we neither of us come from farming backgrounds. Both of our respective parents were all medics. We came into farming without any baggage, but with this clear vision that we would sell direct, be as independent as possible. The friends that we had made when Chris was working on a local farm, they all thought we were crazy. We were hairy-toed hippies, is what we were considered as. And they actually advised us against it. But we were very clear about what we needed to do. But we couldn't be organic initially, but that's another story.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that, because obviously there's a process of transition quite apart from anything else, which is which takes time and takes commitment. But when you started farming, you said that you found that your land was pretty tired and the land around you was tired. I wonder what you mean by that, what you mean by tired, and how you went about restoring the productivity and the energy into that land.
Well, I suppose there's initial sense, very visually, the first thing that would strike me on these farms and the smallholding was actually decrepit infrastructure, sheds falling, fences not being maintained, walls falling, because there just wasn't, I don't know, farming was losing a sense of posterity. Infrastructure was not being maintained. I think that probably had quite a lot to do with the subsidy system. And then obviously with an eye into the biological, ecological health of habitats and having an eye very much tuned into indicator species, which is what I was assessing, I could see that it was bereft of any kind of indicator species. And also, we were very conscious of the amount of vet and med that our neighbouring farmers and our farming friends were using on their livestock. So you kind of think, well, what's going on? So yeah, there was a sort of general jaded sense of the smallholding, the farms around us. Initially, we couldn't afford, because we didn't have the capital, we just kind of spent it on actually buying the land, to go organic. So we did start on a conventional footing, but I soon identified biodiversity hotspots on the farm that we avoided. When we were top dressing, we avoided those completely. And actually, I might also add, Chris and I met at Y College, and Chris's tutor was actually the John Nix. So his initial training was very much in the conventional agricultural principle. So it's been perhaps a much stronger, a bigger transition for him than for me. But we very much had this vision of being independent and price makers, not price takers, which drove our vision.
It's a great phrase, and certainly one that I'm hearing more and more, this idea of being price makers rather than price takers. And I'm struck there, when you're talking about this idea that, kind of post-war, the drive for volume production and that sort of growth of commodity agriculture, which was never fully rewarded, which relied an awful lot on state support, because the farm gate prices themselves were being driven down and down and down. That just kind of leaves people feeling a bit sort of tired, even though they've put their life and soul into the farm that they're working. Whereas agroecology and what you're trying to do and what so many other people around the country now are trying to do is to find their own passion, find their own vision and reconnect with customers. And Denise, I just wondered, when you're talking about species and talking about ecology on the land, I wonder if you feel that the best way to regenerate land, the best way to deliver that agroecology, is to target keystone species. So, for example, trying to, focus on the curlew and bring the curlew back, or whether it's to focus on the soil and habitat management more generally and actually let the species take care of themselves. I wonder if you've a view as to where the balance should lie.
Well, the keystone species won't occur or won't reappear unless you've got the habitat right. And it is, while we all have passion and vision, there's also a lot of common sense that has to be exercised. And very definitely we have to look at the habitats. And the first habitat, number one, is soil. So soil management comes first, and then simultaneously, if it's affordable from all sorts of perspectives, it's habitat infrastructure. So habitat infrastructure had been degraded. We came onto a decrepit farm with very diminished habitat structure. So we started very early on. Thankfully, we started very early on with grant aid to improve the habitat structure and viability of our farm. And it's over the last 30 years, it really is, we can see the dividends. It's quite extraordinary, much more than I would ever have expected. But soil too, that's an interesting one. And we've pushed the boat out, and we've had a very thorough soil survey done of every single factor of soil analysis on every single field on the farm as a baseline to work with. And again, that's showing, really good really good results in terms of microbial biomass, carbon, organic matter. So we know what we're working with. I suppose a lot of conventional farming, and it's never about blame. This is not about pointing the finger. We were all part of it. When Chris and I first came into farming, we're very much part of a conventional system, but just with a different vision. It's about rebuilding a natural asset. We've been degrading a natural asset, and we're now seeing the consequences. We've now got to take a grip of that.
Just going back to the land and land as an asset, it's an expensive one, Nikki. And you're starting out with 20 acres, and obviously you want to be able to grow your herd. And you've said to me in the past that because renting is expensive and you don't have the capital there, you've managed to sort of set up a system, almost a barter system, for the land that you graze from other farmers by promising soil improvement from the way that you manage your cattle, which feels very innovative. And I wonder if that was something that was difficult to convince other farmers to agree to.
We're really lucky that we've got some very open-minded neighbours, and there are people out there who are very open-minded and are willing to try things at least once and see if that makes a difference. So, and I think also, our cows probably do a bit of a good sales job themselves. We have native Shetlands and also white Galloways, and they're particularly beautiful looking cows. So I think any landowner would be quite happy to have them on their ground, and, they're quite nice to look at. So I think that helps a little bit. But yeah, definitely we've approached neighbouring farmers who have got very marginal land, which is perfect for our native cattle, because they really do, get fat and fresh air. They're very, very good doers in terms of being able to eat kind of quite what would be considered marginal or poor nutritive value grasses and plants, and they do very well on them. So we've got neighbours who either don't have the confidence around having livestock or haven't been able to invest the time or their own money into kind of the infrastructure that you need, and so have been very willing to welcome us onto their ground, either at a very reduced rate or for free, given the work that we're doing. And it is great when you then go for a walk around the land with the landowner, and they're very excited about what they're seeing. They're seeing the changes.
And what are those changes? What are they actually seeing, and how quickly do those changes come in?
Well, we're seeing initially, we've only been at this for 2 years, so it'll be interesting to see what changes happen over a longer time period. But what we are seeing is just an opening up of some of the sward. So some of the ground that we're grazing is very much tufted grasses, which are fantastic for voles and other small mammals, which then in turn are great feed for birds of prey. But quite often that means that those areas get taken over by these tufted grasses. So with the cattle going in and disrupting that, we're seeing these niches being created that are allowing wildflowers to come through, an abundance on one particular bit of ground of self-heal, orchids, bird's foot trefoil, all coming through on land that had been very heavily grazed previously. And the landowner absolutely delighted to see that and just couldn't believe that these beautiful flowers were in their field because they'd never seen them before.
So why is that? Is that sort of a combination of resting, but also having the heavy impact of the hooves sort of getting down to seeds that were perhaps deeper down in the soil?
Yeah, so the main thing is rest, and rest is an incredibly powerful tool. We are practicing mob grazing through holistic management, so holistic planned grazing, and the tenet of that is exactly what you just said, which is this idea of high density, high impact on a small area with the cattle and then moving them on, and they might not come back to that particular piece of ground for 30 days on the shortest sort of rotation, and some places we only graze once a year. So that rest is absolutely the thing that is allowing those plants to come through. And like you say, it's that soil disturbance. So we're creating optimal disturbance that is giving that space, that niche for those plants to come through into the sward and offer additional habitat.
So that's a really good example of how the community around you has been supportive of you as a new entrant. It's helped you out. It's made the finances doable because you've been able to work with that local community. And I wonder if there are other ways that the community supported you or other ways that you've supported the community.
Well, the community have absolutely supported us in terms of buying our beef, which has been amazing, and really very keen to engage with short supply chains. They see the cattle, they know that it's us and it's our cattle. They see the work that we're doing with them, and so very keen to support from that point of view. But the wider community, you're absolutely right, have been really supportive, and we work with a number of farmers locally, good friends of ours now, to share equipment, whether that's trailers, livestock trailers, so being able to move our cattle around when we have to take them to the abattoir, and then in return doing things like fixing tractors or supporting them with moving animals or whatever it is that they need help with. And I think that kind of local community-based support structures are just so important, and you'll find those in all farming communities, but for us as new entrants it's been particularly valuable.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think when people think of farmers, and often I think when farmers think of themselves, and certainly the conversations around mental health and seclusion and loneliness in farming, there is a sense that a farmer may not see somebody from one day, 1 month to the next, whereas actually what you're saying is that there's a really strong community, a real sort of push and pull where people are chipping in and helping each other out, and as a community you succeed, and that's fantastic. Denise, I wonder how important the community has been to you and your business.
While there was the initial doubt about what we were doing, because what we were doing was really bucking the trend, going organic, setting up a butchery in Berwickshire, which is very precision farmed, apart from our little outlier up here. Very definitely, when it comes to very human issues of illness, grief, loss, the community locally is absolutely indescribable in terms of the support. So these very human things are always there. When it comes to accidents, for example, if there's our neighbouring farm had a fire, we all went in and helped him. Some years ago, our cattle got out, were wandering up the main road during the summertime. We had a fantastic, really fun community support, including our local police force came out. So it was a really great community gathering in the middle of lockdown. Borrowing, lending machines. We have a very good relationship with our closest neighbouring farms in terms of helping out when they're pushed to borrow machines. So that's really important. That's always been there and always been helpful.
Now, you're just southeast of Edinburgh, and Nikki talked about the way that the community, were quite a lot of the retail customers for her from that local community. Do you have an understanding of where your customer base is? Are you selling all the way down to London and beyond, or are you sort of largely within a 50-mile radius?
Well, actually, I think it's got probably quite a lot to do with when we started. Because when we started, there was quite a lot of doubt and scepticism about selling direct as a farmer. So we found very early on we had to go beyond our local community to sell. And, we have a regional farmers market, a monthly one, but we really had to go to Edinburgh and Glasgow to sell our meat way back then and develop a website. So in a way, we had to go beyond our locality to sell because our locality wasn't ready for us. So yes, absolutely. Most of our stuff is Edinburgh, Glasgow, online and ethical retail all around the UK.
I was just reflecting on what Denise was saying about having a local community that's kind of ready and open to shopping locally and supporting local farmers. And I'm thinking that that's probably also linked to this, the last year and COVID-19. And so, in Aberdeenshire, there's very much a beef sort of system based on barley because, it's beef and barley up here. And I think that maybe locally people would have, supported the local butcher and it would have been quite conventional beef that was coming through to them, and they would still be supporting, local farmers. But I think with COVID, people are out and about more in their very local area, and that really helped because they were getting to see us moving our cows every day, and we'd come and have a chat and say, well, what are you doing? And this is a bit different. We've not seen this electric fence before. Why are you doing it this way? And that would give us an opportunity to have that conversation that if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic and people, didn't have anywhere to go, they might not have seen us during the middle of the day doing that because they'd have been at work or school or whatever. So I think that there's been a real shift in the last 12 months around how people view the importance of local supply chains linked to empty shelves in the supermarket, but also having that opportunity to get out and about in rural areas and talk to farmers and understand why they're doing what they're doing.
It really makes the point, doesn't it, that it's so important for customers to be able to interact as directly as possible with the producers that are making the food that they eat, and obviously for people being able to get out into the countryside, whether that's on footpaths in England or on on tracks and trails in Scotland, critically important, just sort of seeing how things go, being able to ask questions and hopefully chat to a farmer that's prepared to actually take the time to talk to them, which is always important as well. Denise, Nikki is farming just the beef at the moment. You've got cattle, sheep and pigs in rotation. Was that always the case? Did you start out that way? And how does the rotation work in practice, just in general terms?
So yes, we always were going to be, because we always had this vision of selling direct, we were always going to have beef, cattle, sheep and pigs. So we've always had that mix. And we had a traditional rotation and then of course going organic. And now we're pasture for life certified. So we practice a more holistic rotational grazing, and we're putting in the infrastructure to do more mob grazing. So the actual rotation, the pigs, we rotate them from one 20-acre field to another 20-acre field on a 12 to 18 month basis. And sheep sort of come behind cattle. So yes, it's been a pretty traditional rotation, but we are reviewing all of that. And not least, we are reviewing the impact of outdoor, our pigs are free range and we've had Tamworth and Red Duroc Cross for 30 years. But we are looking critically at the impact of outdoor pigs on our soil quality. And we've started actually working in order to spread the environmental burden of pigs, and we need pork for our butchery. And we're now we're sort of sharing the environmental burden of producing pork, and are in discussions and actually have started using pigs from organic farmer on sandier soils in Aberdeen.
And you produce cereal, don't you, for your own pigs? I wonder, do you plough to do that, or is it no-till? Or?
We're going to minimum till. There's a slight issue. We've done minimum till, actually we've sown grassland minimum till, and that was fairly effective. But we are in the early stages of reducing tillage, and we're finding some of our min-till, no-till not as successful as we would hope. But we are moving more to, we're increasing cattle numbers significantly. So there's a lot more going under grass.
It's really interesting because I think one of the sort of principles when we talk about that at a sort of policy level is that you're sort of looking at the land and what the land can best produce. And it sounds like you're sort of going through that process at this stage with the pigs, looking at whether the land that you have is best suited, whether it's better to import the pork from a more local farm, and trying out lots of different ways of managing that cereal production, which sounds fascinating. It'd be really interesting to hear how that goes on over the next year or two.
Yeah, it's basically learning the biological or ecological capacity of your farm. And we found when we were completely self-sufficient in cereals for our pigs, our farm was suffering. So we had to cut back on cereals. So we actually started buying in organic barley from local farms, to buying in the acres. But even then there was an issue. So it was really looking very critically at the way we farm in terms of the agroecological benefits.
Denise, the retail side of your business was always central to your vision. When you set up in 1990, you said that it was very much, you wanted to sell direct. Customers were very much part of your approach to farming and the way that you were going to make a living. And do you think that you'd be able to farm profitably and agroecologically if you didn't have that retail side of the operation?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, first of all, when we first went organic, and that was in 2005, immediately we didn't have that and that was 10 to 15,000 pound annual cost for agrochemicals. So, when you start farming agroecologically and start recognizing and learning the sort of natural capacity of your farm, you're cutting back costs. And I think, in fact, there's been some really significant work done recently on the pathway to profitability from an agroecological, nature-friendly farming perspective. And it is very much a refocus on profit margin as opposed to productivity at all costs. And it's showing some very interesting results. So the answer is, okay, it's not a silver bullet, but very definitely farming with this changed mindset that it's profit margin management, not productivity management that matters, that you can actually start finding ways to farm financially sustainably and obviously environmentally sustainably too. And, just another thing, vet and med on parasite management, that's changed completely. So we don't have the same need for vet and med either.
So that's interesting that you feel that even if you weren't having your own butchery and selling direct, that just the fact that you're farming in an agroecological way helps to reduce the costs of the inputs, including the medications, meaning that potentially, even if yield reduces a little bit, that there's still more profit there. But by the time you've built in that butchery and the retail business, part of the business as well, then that's the point at which you really become price makers rather than price takers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Organic Pasture for Life, we're producing fat cattle 500 to 600 kilo live weight within 24 months. And, we're by no means, a highly productive farm. We have to manage marginality. It requires a different mindset, but it's very definitely possible. Having the butchery has increased turnover because we're adding value on farm. So we're shortening the food and management and financial chains to good effect.
I want to come back to your butchery and online business in just a moment, Denise. But Nikki, I wonder how you, as a new entrant, with a relatively small herd, how you've gone about building up your customer base. Because I think, part of it is from your local community, but part of it isn't.
Yeah, some of our customers live all over the UK, and it's been interesting seeing how many actually live in the sort of in East Anglia, interestingly, because their feedback is that they're struggling to get hold of really decent sort of grass-fed or pastured beef in that area. So there's definitely a market there if anyone listening is considering that. But yeah, so Twitter for us has been a key way of raising awareness using Instagram. So that social media aspect really, really important, and building that story and that community online has been key to broadening our reach, I suppose, which has been fantastic. And
do you get a sense of who you're selling to? Are they people, you talk about East Anglia, but are they largely rural people who know a bit more about the way the countryside works already, or do you have urban customers as well?
Yeah, we have both urban and rural customers, some who are just really interested and love our cows and love what we're doing and just really engage with the story that we share, and others who are aware of the ecological damage that some types of farming is causing and want to still eat meat, but eat it in an intentional way where they know that they're able to have a positive impact. And I think it's also about recognising that shorter supply chains mean that the farmer is secured more of an income in terms of the percentage of the money that's going directly to the farmer rather than through longer supply chains like supermarkets, etc. I think the other thing that links back to the community is that we've got some good friends who are farming in a very similar way, who have really been an inspiration to us when we moved up here, and they sell out of their beef immediately. Within an hour of beef being available from them, it's gone. And they've been really supportive of then signposting customers whose orders they can't fulfill by signposting them to us and saying, well, no, we can't provide you with any beef, but Nikki and James have got a couple of 10 kilo boxes left that's available. Why don't you contact them? And that collaboration and cooperation over competition is absolutely central to the success of our way of farming, for sure.
Denise, why do people come to you rather than going to the supermarket? Do they talk to you about animal welfare or environmental impacts or nutritional content of the meat? What is it that you think's most of interest to your customers?
Well, all of the above. We have customers contacting us direct about all those different aspects. My feeling is that health is quite a big driver. Funnily enough, we get quite a lot of individuals perhaps who've been vegan who have then had health issues and have been advised that they really ought to improve the hemoglobin or the iron levels of their blood and they need to get meat. So yes, the longest conversations are with customers who are converting to meat from being vegetarian or vegan for many years. And that's not a plug, that's actually how it happens. But still also environmental. And we also get quite a lot of customers asking us about the slaughter process and welfare and how we handle our animals before they go to the abattoir. So I think probably health at the moment seems to be driving most of the conversations that people have with us. And certainly at farmers markets, we do a lot of direct customer facing at farmers markets.
As one of Denise's customers, I'd say it's also because they make the best charcuterie in Scotland. It's phenomenal. So that's definitely one of the reasons that we buy.
Fantastic. I know that we're doing other podcasts around now about meat alternatives. The growth in things like the Linda McCartney burger and plant-based versions like that, but also cellular meat that's sort of being grown in a lab. Do you think that there is a genuine nutritional difference?
Oh, yes. If you're growing meat from a stem cell origin in a petri dish without really understanding exactly what the nutritional content of that stem cell is, you don't really know what you're developing. Whereas what we do, and actually work published by Newcastle University, which looks at 4 different farming systems, actually doesn't include stem cell meat, but no doubt that will be looked at some stage. And very definitely, this is a peer-reviewed published paper that demonstrates that all grass conservation grazing has a higher nutritional content of omega-3 than the 3 other systems of supermarket organic, supermarket non-organic, and conventional. So absolutely, yes.
Because we're doing this podcast to, try and help other farmers to sort of see themselves in the agroecology space, I wonder if we just quickly talk about your butchery. Obviously, it sounds like a substantial investment, and I wonder where the money came from for that, whether it came from, within your business because of the savings that you'd made through reduction in inputs, because of the additional profits you were making through the retail, or whether you needed to take out additional bank loans, and how big a decision that was for you.
It was a huge decision, and it actually coincided with us completing our organic conversion. So it wasn't that we'd only just started reducing farm costs, but no, it was a combination of a European grant, a food and processing marketing grant through the Scottish Government, and a bank loan. It was very squeaky bum initially, but we were very driven by our vision. So it was difficult, not least convincing people to buy our meat, chefs and restaurants. So yeah, it was a big investment. It was a big risk, but we are actually, and we would never have done it without the support from the bank or the support from grant aid. But wow, we are glad that we've done it. We are really glad.
Just as a final question on your system, Denise, obviously you are organic. You've jumped through those hoops in order to make the transition, in order to pass the inspections. How important is your organic certification?
Oh, it's crucial. With the logo on our label, it actually confirms the promise we're making to our customers about the fact that every mouthful they take will have an environmental benefit and not impact welfare and will also be healthier. So it actually verifies our promise to our customer, and it gives us market traction for our products. So it's absolutely essential that we have both organic certification and pasture for life certification. So it takes us a bit further. It is those 2 certifications are the gold standard. They're gold standard in terms of farming and meat production.
And of course, Nikki, you're pasture for life.
No, we're not certified, but that's something that we're aiming towards. And it's purely at the moment just because of the size of our herd and the costs of going through certification. But it's absolutely something that we're working towards. If we look at the standards, we're pretty much doing all of that already. But actually going through that process isn't something that we've done yet. But I agree with Denise that it is absolutely the gold standard. And it just, at the moment, we're having to rely on people trusting us and knowing us and getting to know what we do to recognise that we are 100% pasture based, but no, having that certification will make a big difference to us.
I'd like to, because Denise, you mentioned the importance of the health of your livestock and the way that you can reduce, some of those medications, because when you started out, you were seeing an awful lot of expenditure on vet medications in surrounding farms. Agroecological systems rely on diversity and they promote abundant nature, and obviously parasites are part of nature. And I'm wondering with liver fluke and other parasites specifically, because I know that they can be quite a problem for farmers in wetter parts of Britain. Are these things problems for you? Do you think that agroecological systems make it easier or harder to manage parasites like liver fluke?
Well, if I can relate our experience from pre-organic to post-organic. So pre-organic, we prophylactically treated our cattle for rotavirus and cryptosporidium Leptosporidia, and also coccidiosis. When we went organic, which meant that we were no longer top dressing our grass fields, coccidiosis stopped. And I mean, absolutely stopped. Okay, we've had a little bit since because we increased our herd by buying another organic herd from a different part of the country. And obviously they came with a different set of immunity credentials to ours. So we no longer have to prophylactically treat for anything. And that is organic agroecological. And I think really what we are witnessing or part of is a natural increase in the natural immunity of our livestock.
It's remarkable, isn't it? Because it clearly is a big worry and a big expenditure for a lot of farmers. And so if you're partly building up immunity and partly sort of building up, the rest of nature, so more insects and birds that predate on parasites, then that has to be a bit of a win. Nikki, any thoughts on this at all?
Just to say that I've never wormed my cattle, but we have done fecal egg counts and they've come back as 0. So I think for us, the combination of mob grazing and agroforestry, where the cattle are getting access to trees which have got natural tannins, which is offering kind of a natural anthelmintic, those are the things that are making the difference. And the fact that we graze very tall sward, so tall grass, sometimes the grass is taller than our cattle. I mean, they are small cattle, but we've got fescues and cocksfoot that stand above 5 foot. So that the cattle are eating the seed heads and they're keeping their heads high and they're well out of the parasite zone down in the bottom of the grass. So we absolutely believe that this approach is enabling us to not have to give any medication to our cattle.
Just bringing us to the end then, I wonder, Nikki, let's start with you. Are there mistakes that you think you've made over the last couple of years, even, before you actually went into farming, when you were just thinking about going into farming, things that you do differently in retrospect if you had your time again?
Absolutely. So many mistakes, but so many learning opportunities, and would say that it's a bit cheesy to say it, but the community and the people around us and the people that have supported us have been absolutely invaluable, and always having somebody to go to for advice or just to kind of throw ideas around with has been so important. But yeah, always making mistakes, always learning from them, and just, I suppose the benefit of that is that, if you are going with this learning open mindset, then yeah, you can make those changes. And you can reflect on how you can do things differently rather than putting it down to something that, that's just the way the soil is, or that's just because the weather's the way it is. Actually, it's about how can I adapt? How can I change what I'm doing to make sure that the outcome is as positive as possible?
Thank you, Nikki. And Denise, you've been in this business for 30 years and, you talked about being a new entrant. Now you're into succession. Your son is working on the farm and his family as well. If you had your time again, are there things that you'd do differently, or are you broadly happy with where you are?
Well, I think definitely we would have started planting quicker, getting hedgerows, getting the farm infrastructure improved much more quickly. And very definitely, we wouldn't have had continental cross cattle. We would have gone straight into native breeds immediately and started building up immunity immediately. And of course, going organic straight away, that would have been fantastic, but it just wasn't affordable at the time. So those are sort of three things possibly.
Fantastic. You've both been wonderful. It's been so good to talk to you about your systems and your experiences. I'd like to thank my guests, Nikki Yoxall from Howe Mill and Denise Walton from Peelham Farm. Denise and Nikki are Agroecology Ambassadors for the Soil Association. There are going to be more programmes in this series coming soon, and if you've enjoyed listening, please come back and listen to more. Tell your friends, like us, review us and share our links. Farmgate is a partnership project for Farmwell and FAI Farms. We're funded by Sankalpa, and you can join the conversation on Twitter by searching for Farmgate Podcast. I've been ffinlo Costain. Bye for now.